We start in England and those scenes at Old Trafford. Manchester United, of course, were due to play Liverpool today. That game postponed after protests outside the stadium spilled to the pitch at Old Trafford. As we welcome in Mark Ogden, Naina Manua and Gab Marcotti. Mark, I want to start with you. Were you outside Old Trafford? Just talk us through your experience.
Yeah, even before I arrived at the stadium today, Dan, it was obvious there was going to be trouble. That we'd heard reports that a lot of fans had gathered outside the Man United team hotel, which is about 2 miles from Old Trafford. The coaches couldn't leave the hotel. And by the time I got to Old Trafford, maybe 2.5, 3 hours before kick-off, which is really early at the moment in terms of the COVID protocols, all the gates were locked. I was told I couldn't get in. Lockdown of the stadium had happened, so we had to park outside for maybe an hour. And then more fans arrived. And then on the other side of the stadium, the fans had got in from the front end of the stadium where they run onto the pitch. They started to climb on the goalpost, went up the tunnel, into dressing rooms, offices. You know, United staff had to hide in their offices, lock themselves in rooms. It was chaotic, and as we know, the scenes were so bad that they basically breached the COVID protocols. That the red zone in Old Trafford is where only kind of it's a biosecure environment where players and staff can go, and the fans had been in the dressing rooms, they'd been in the tunnel, so that meant that it was no longer secure. So eventually the game had to be called off because, first of all, it wasn't COVID safe, and secondly, nobody knew if there were any fans still in the stadium who were, you know, planning to disrupt the game once it was started. So a bad day all round for people at United and the Premier League.
Mark, how much were the fact that they breached the Old Trafford security, got themselves on the pitch, how much was that premeditated, or how much was that just a spontaneous act?
Well, I think people have known this has been planned for a while, that certainly the protests have been planned. It's been well publicised all week, and I've heard reports, unconfirmed reports, that one of the gates at Old Trafford wasn't locked as it might have been, and that fans were allowed to get in. So if that's the case, or whether they forced it down, whichever way, they shouldn't have been in there. I mean, people that go to Old Trafford will tell you it's the hardest stadium in England to get in. Even in normal times, there's all sorts of checks. There's, you know, the security checks way before you even get to the stadium. So for fans to get in the stadium, it reflects very badly on people who are charged with keeping them out. So you have to wonder how it happened. And we've seen the scenes on the pitch. That is just, you know, it's unprecedented for this to happen in a Premier League stadium of the magnitude of Old Trafford. For fans to get in, not only to run around and cause chaos, but to film themselves climbing the post, scoring goals, doing all sorts of things. It was just crazy. And you know, the fact that the biggest game in English football traditionally has been called off by fans is a huge thing.
Mark, it seemed to be more chaotic than any sort of violent edge to it going into the actual stadium. Yeah,
I mean, you see the pitch in the stadium. It looks like a bunch of guys playing around and having fun. But the reality is that the Greater Manchester Police have released a statement tonight talking about how one of their officers has had to have emergency surgery, having had his face slashed by a bottle that was thrown. So it did turn ugly and it was violent. And I think, you know, thankfully it wasn't worse, but this is the situation we're in, that people have been hurt, and you know, they may have been looking like they were having fun on the pitch, but outside the stadium trouble happened, and you know, a police officer is undergoing emergency surgery because of it.
So where do we stand with regards to the empathy that people seem to be having towards the fans, Mark?
Well, I think certainly from the European Super League situation, the fans created a lot of goodwill with the way that they protested. They came together peacefully. I think there were obviously situations at Arsenal where it got quite boisterous, but we didn't see it turn into violence. And I think this is the situation now whereby this seemed to cross the line in the sense that it wasn't a peaceful protest, that trouble happened, and I'm not sure that the United fans will have that kind of public support now because of what happened here. It seemed to cross the line from a peaceful protest to I think as well, this was more specifically aimed at the ownership of Man United. It wasn't about the European Super League. The European Super League was maybe the trigger for, you know, a long-held grudge against the Glazers to come back into the open again. But it's hard to say you're going to get public support when this sort of thing happens, where you're breaking into a stadium, the property was taken, corner flags were taken, match balls were taken, police officers hurt. It's hard to kind of gain the public sympathy when that happens.
Mark, we've seen protests before, obviously, against the Glazers. Will this have any sort of different effect?
I don't think it will. You know, I think obviously the Glazers will be aware of what's happened. I'm assuming they're still in the US, they're in Florida, they're in New York where they have homes, and I think they'll see it, they'll be disappointed about it, and they'll think that it's not great, doesn't reflect well on them or the club, but I don't think it'll change the ownership. The club is worth, I think, £3 billion, maybe $4 billion on the stock exchange. Who can buy that? The fans can't afford to buy it. The fans can't buy the owners out. And while the Glazers are making money out of the club, you know, every year they can take 70, 80 million out of the club. They're not going to sell. It's making money for them. It's a profitable enterprise. And you know, the issues they've had with the fans, they've had them before. Not to the extent where they've had fans invading the pitch, but you know, the Green and Gold campaign, which happened, I think 2010, that was a prolonged campaign against the owners, and they rolled that out. And I think they'll ride this one out. I think the season's due to end in maybe 2 or 3 weeks. They'll hope that the summer comes along. They'll sign a couple of players, quell the majority of unrest, and there'll always be a minority of fans who are completely against the Glazers all the time. But if you can get the majority of those fans happily to turn up at Old Trafford, as they do, I think that the Glazers will ride it out, because the Man United is worth too much for them to let it go.
Well, thank you very much for watching ESPN on YouTube. For more sports highlights and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app. And for live streaming, premium content, and let's not forget as well, ESPN FC 7 days a week. Subscribe to ESPN+.